back to when you were in school, breaking down words into sounds. Or maybe you had the Dick and Jane books. See Dick run. See Jane kick the ball. Do you remember? Or don't you? What resonated with you when you were learning to read and spell? Anything? Nothing? I don't remember much myself. I readily learned to read and spell, and I'm not sure if they used a phonics method or a whole language method, meaning a sounded out program, or one that repeats the same words over and over in context. What I do know is that I had the ability to easily learn words and their spellings. I didn't have trouble memorizing any sequence, the alphabet, days of the week, months or seasons of the year. I would have learned with just about any instructional type. People who can memorize sequences well can learn with just about any method. However, about 20% of the population can't learn by memorization, and sequences are particularly difficult for them, especially the sequences of sounds or phonemes in words. We have a diagnostic label we use to describe this barrier to learning, dyslexia. Dyslexia is a language-based learning disability that has been used to describe 80 to 90% of those with learning disabilities. Some say about 20% of the population is dyslexic. And if that's the case, 1 in 5 people watching this presentation are dyslexic. How many of you have had difficulty with word finding, paraphrasing, comparing and contrasting, or making inferences? Those are dyslexic traits as well. How many of you knew somebody who went to prison due to their limited options, due to having lower literacy skills? For those people, the school-to-prison pipeline is still alive and well. Just imagine if we could teach all students to read and spell before they graduate, and even better, during their formative years. It's time for a literacy revolution. Dyslexia has long been linked in society's mind to intelligence or capability. But did you know that 20% of MIT students are dyslexic? Children with dyslexia are bright and capable students, but when they're not provided with effective intervention, they're left to think they're stupid and incapable. They think, teachers couldn't teach me, literacy specialists couldn't teach me, there must be something really wrong with my brain. When they're not provided with effective intervention, they internalize their lack of progress as their fault. They may become angry, disillusioned, and head off on the wrong path. A path that may land them in jail or lead to drug abuse, or in the very least, prevent them from developing the skills that they need to become productive members of society in the way that they envision. I've met dyslexic students with genius level IQs, with elevated athletic ability or creative ability or entrepreneurship qualities. Marking errors instead of providing them with effective tools and factual information about the writing system creates this misperception, and it all begins in kindergarten. Did you know that we give some of the most difficult words to learn to read and spell to our youngest learners? And when they fail to do so, they're left to believe that it's their fault. What happens when you repeatedly teach a child that they're incapable? They may develop what I call school-induced behavioral challenges, anxiety, oppositional defiant disorder, sometimes with physical aggression. I've worked with children with these labels, and the symptoms faded away when they were validated and taught how the writing system worked. One mom told me that her son was punished when he couldn't read the words get or think aloud in class. He became frustrated when she insisted that he read them, and then he became angry. And then he was treated as a behavior problem because in the teacher's perception, he was being defiant. His punishments included seclusion and restraint. I'm happy to report he's now quite a happy fellow, and he's actually enjoying literacy intervention with a fellow speech-language pathologist. Just last week, his mom boasted that he independently wrote a sentence using the word anomalous. When I started in private practice as a speech-language pathologist specializing in literacy, I began working with a little girl who was repeating kindergarten. She expressed to me that she was upset because she couldn't memorize the words she needed to get into the cookie club. See, there's this system that's used in schools that's used to reward students for making academic achievements without supporting the students who struggle. The problem with using the system in this way is that it teaches children that there are winners and losers from the very beginning. 5- and 6-year-olds learn that the winners get into the cookie club and the losers don't. And it's not because they're not paying attention. It's not because they're lazy. And it's not because their brains aren't ready yet. Perhaps it's with the way they're taught. Let's take a look at some of the words that are presented to kindergartners to memorize. These words are sometimes called tricky, or red, or heart, or irregular. But really, is there really such a thing as an irregular word? The reason these terms are used is because there's a belief that there are spelling rules and that these words don't follow those rules, that they're exceptions. But what if I told you that the people who created these rules didn't understand the English writing system? Do you remember this one? I before E except after C. Except. And the list goes on and on. What good are rules if there's all these exceptions? And let's be honest, you and I still use spell check for some of these. Here's the thing. There's a reason behind these spellings, and they can be taught more easily than a bunch of rules with a myriad of exceptions. There have been many advancements in our understanding of the English writing system. Those who have provided intervention with a method called structured word inquiry have had tremendous success with students who have been failed by curriculums and sounded out methods. The problem arises when you ask dyslexic students to learn by sound or to memorize tricks or cute stories and exceptions. It overloads their cognitive capacity, and it blocks reading comprehension and the thinking needed for spelling. It's a good thing we have a better way, a way that all learners can access the English writing system, and it's time we start using it to embark on a literacy revolution. This information isn't new. Nobody invented it. It's always been there. For some reason, it never made it into our educational system. One important point is that English words can't merely be sounded out. True story about a family member. He was asked to read a passage aloud in class, and he stopped at a word that he didn't know. The teacher said, "Well, just sound it out." And he read breathed. The teacher rolled her eyes and said, "No, it's breathed." And the class laughed. That was 40 years ago, and that memory haunts him to this day. These acts are traumatizing. Another reason English words can't be sounded out is because when stress shifts, so does pronunciation. Consider the words equal and equality, ridicule and ridiculous. Rather than asking students to try to sound words out, it makes more sense to analyze what's there. The lexical content, or the spelling of the morphemes, is consistent. Morphemes include bases, prefixes, suffixes, and an element we aren't told about, connecting vowel letters. Because morphemes are consistent, they're more concrete and easier to learn. Plus, the morphemes hold all the meaning. What's been missing from teacher education, speech-language pathology programs, and literacy specialist certifications is English orthography. English orthography is comprised of 3 parts: etymology, morphology, and phonology. It contains every piece of information we need to teach reading via spelling. Etymology, the history and origin of words; morphology, the concrete structure; and phonology, the link between meaning, spelling, and pronunciation. So how did I discover this? Well, after years of reading research and attending conferences and traveling all over to learn yet another program, I discovered the work of Dr. Peter Bowers. He created a method using 4 questions to investigate the spelling of words to understand meaning and structure before analyzing the words for their sounds. He devised this framework after meeting a man who got his degree from Cambridge University. Apparently, scholars learn things at Cambridge that we don't always learn in other universities. He took this important information and began pursuing a PhD to blaze a new trail for literacy for all. Over the past 7 years, I've incorporated structured word inquiry into my language intervention, and I can work with any student, including those with severe language-based learning disabilities, low IQ scores, and even adults who have lost their literacy skills following a stroke. I knew that the information that I learned could be applied to benefit all learners. Language and literacy skills give a person power in our society. The power to learn by reading, the power to argue a point, to defend oneself, and to pursue any major one wants to pursue that fits their interests and abilities. They give the one power to be independent with activities of daily living, reading street signs, directions, medicine bottles, to fill out job applications, or to read and write emails. Literacy truly is the great equalizer. It creates a more even playing field for those pursuing life, liberty, and happiness. People face many obstacles when they can't read and spell. It's no wonder that parents become distraught when their child isn't learning, or when they're told their child is lazy or not paying attention. It's no wonder that they become enraged when they're told there's nothing more that can be done, even when their child's bringing home failing grades or grades that are far below what they're capable of achieving. But most parents have no idea that the knowledge to bring literacy to all learners is non-existent in the curriculums used in schools. And most parents don't know that setting a child in front of a computer to complete a program isn't effective instruction or intervention. My hope is to get this information out there so that parents can make sure that their children learn the literacy skills they need to take their rightful place in society. It's also my hope that schools start allowing teachers to teach freely without being tied to curriculums and constant data collection. Teachers have been forced to become bookkeepers for accountants rather than scholars who teach critical thinking and creativity. The choice to look for yet another curriculum to replace the one that's not working isn't a good plan. It never has been, because there isn't one that benefits all learners. It's my hope that more schools follow those who have discovered structured word inquiry and provide their teachers and speech-language pathologists with the continuing education that will result in increased literacy for all. I cherish the moments when they realize that they're not the problem, and they never were. They can indeed learn to understand the English writing system. It's so rewarding to be involved with something that really does change lives, something that the world needs, and something that brings humanity to everyday life. Speaking of humanity, it's time we start humanizing making mistakes. When we make a mistake during word study, we celebrate. We learn from mistakes. For a teacher to ridicule any learner is an act of inhumanity. Making mistakes shouldn't be punished with red marks on a worksheet or written or verbal chastisement at any level in education. They should be rewarded for bringing up the next discussion point. A mistake is a learning opportunity. It presents a time for a teacher to shine. Let's look at some examples of what can be taught to children when we use a method that teaches to their strength rather than their greatest deficits. We'll look at action. We'll begin with question 1. What does it mean? This step includes exploring meanings and the etymology of a spelling. Action is a noun from the Latin root actionem, a putting in motion, a performing, a doing, from past participle agere, to do. Moving on to question 2, how is it built? This step explores meaning further and analyzes morphology, the consistent and more concrete piece of orthography. Everyone's heard about tion saying shun, right? In sounded out methods, they present AC, tion. But if tion is a suffix, what's AC? To fully understand the meaning and spelling of a word, it's helpful to find the base. It's clear that AC has no meaning, but what if we include the T? Aha, we have meaning. We can act in a play. We can act bravely. We can act like a leader. So what's left? ION. Now we see the actual suffix. Moving on to question 3, what are the relatives? In this step, we search for other spellings that share a base or a sense of meaning. This is a partial word web for the family of act. We can also house the siblings in the mother of a word family, the matrix. Look at all the words that can be learned when you study the entire family. When children learn using structured word inquiry, their vocabulary and language skills grow exponentially. I know what you're thinking, but what about the sounds? We get to the phonemes after we have a solid understanding of meaning and structure, so learners have a scaffolding on which they can hang the phonology, the most abstract piece of orthography. And that brings us to question 4. What jobs are the letters doing? In ACT, A represents A, C represents K, and T represents T. In action, A represents A, C represents K, and T represents sh. I, O represents A, and N represents N. We see here that the I is marking the T, sh, but it's not spelling a phoneme. This pronunciation shift marked by I occurs in other spellings like spatial, equation, and question. Not only that, but I can change the pronunciation of other consonants as well, as in special, explosion, and mission. I know, mind blown, right? This realization was my first epiphany. As a speech-language pathologist of 17 years, I wondered what else I didn't know about the English writing system. It turns out it was a lot. But the good news is that everyone can learn what I learned at their leisure. You don't have to know everything about English orthography to begin, but when you do start to learn, the epiphanies will come flowing in for you too, and you can teach each piece of understanding to the children that you work with. Even starting with teaching ION as a suffix leads to a powerful shift in understanding for students, especially those with dyslexia. When you analyze what is there, meaningful learning can take place for all learners. We have the knowledge we need to begin the literacy revolution.